Before the season even kicks off, soccer fans are already making predictions. Who wins the league? Who qualifies for Europe? And who's lifting the trophy at season's end? On Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code CUP26 to get $10 when you trade 10. KALSHI, Kalshi. Trade the beautiful game. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to How Are the Podcast. And at last we've made it. We've had a strange World Cup during the summer to keep us going for a little while. And then Sunderland had a trip to the US that included a lot of Elvis Presley, of course, because of our new pink strip. But next time on a pre-season tour, would like a little bit more action, please, of course. And then we had a French double-header that ended up with a win over Rennes last weekend. But we can now sit down for our first opposition preview of the 2026-27 season as Sunderland travelled to Portman Road to take on newly promoted Ipswich Town. And this season, looking at it, we mentioned it in the preview during the week, it's potentially a big crossroads for Sunderland after last season's huge achievements, qualifying for the Europa League. And our opponents this weekend are looking to try and secure a second season in the top flight for only the third time since their unbroken 18 years in the old Division 1 back in the 70s and 80s, with a little bit of help from Eric Gates, of course, back then. So there's a lot at stake this season for both clubs. So both will be hoping to get off to a flying start. So to talk all about it, we're very lucky to have a good friend of our very own Nick Barnes, because we have someone who's been commentating on the Tractor Boys for around a quarter of a century for BBC Radio Suffolk. I'm privileged to be joined today by the brilliant Brenner Woolley. Hello, Brenner.
Hi, Chris. Nice to speak to you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yes, fantastic. And, well, we was just saying we're finally there, but do you get to have a good break during the summer?
Yeah, it's been really good, really nice, and the longest break I can remember, as is always the case when you go from championship, at least the end of the regular championship season, to not be involved in the playoffs, and then get up to the Premier League. I think it's something like 16 weeks. And I know we had the World Cup to kind of tide us over. There's nothing like club football, and particularly club football when, of course, you've been promoted to the Premier League. So it's been a long summer. It's been a good summer, a very busy one at Ipswich Town, which I'm sure we'll talk about extensively. But I've enjoyed a little bit of time away with Mr. Barnes as well. You mentioned a friendship with Nick. We tend to go away at the end of every season, and we've done a fair bit of Europe for the last 10, 12 years. But this year we branched out to North Africa. So we had a few days in Marrakesh. And it was one of those rarities when both of us, when we started to talk about football, which we tend to, it'll surprise you to hear, we're both fairly chipper about the way the season had gone, and it's not always been the case. We've had summers when Nick's been on a high and I've been on a bit of a downer, and vice versa. And sometimes we've been feeling fairly neutral. But after his team qualified for Europe and mine got promoted to the Premier League, it was smiles all around.
Yeah. So were you straight into the messages when the fixture list came out?
Straight away, couldn't believe it. And of course, being in the media, we get a little heads up ahead of time. So even before the release was it about the 18th of June? It's been a while ago now anyway. It was unbelievable straight away. Nick's down here for a curry this Friday night. So I'm looking forward to seeing him. And then it's ages till we're in your part of the world. Something like, I think we've actually got, and dare I say it on a Sunderland podcast, I think we've got St James's Park and the Stadium of Light back-to-back away games around about the springtime. So I always look forward to a trip to the Northeast.
Yeah, well, we'll see what the distance is between the two games. They might just end up staying up here for a week or something like that instead of doing the journey. Because I've just been to Norfolk and I know what the journey was, even from Sheffield. But speaking of journeys, actually, because I was reading that you're originally from up our neck of the woods up in Berwick. So how did you end up an institution, as I've been told by my friends who support Ipswich Town at the Tractor Boys?
Maybe this I should be in an institution. Perhaps you misheard them over a beer or two. Yeah, I am. Berwick upon Tweed, born and bred, came right through the educational system there, and then ended up being a student in Liverpool for a few years, but did a postgraduate qualification in broadcast journalism back in the day, which frighteningly enough now is 30 years ago. It was 1996 that I graduated from there. And having done that, eventually got myself a job in radio on Merseyside because I loved that part of the world. And after a couple of years there, gaining experience, kind of cutting my teeth, and this was all in news at that time, a little bit of sport. But then I went to Hallam FM in Sheffield, bigger station, an area that I know you know really well. Loved my time in Sheffield. It was terrific. But still largely news, a little bit of sport, but I'd always wanted to work in sports radio or sports broadcasting in particular, because growing up in the 70s, you had either ITV or BBC, and I tended to gravitate more towards grandstand, match of the day, love sports personality of the year. Then you had test match cricket, darts, everything, tennis, cricket, the lot was on BBC. So I'd always wanted to work for the BBC, and a job came up down in Suffolk in the summer of 2001. So just celebrate my 25th anniversary in this part of the world. It was a part of the world that I didn't know from Adam, really. I didn't have any connections. I'd never been, it's not a part of the world that you go through to get to anywhere. You've kind of got to go out on a limb to get there, as beautiful as it is. But it was just the fact that it was the BBC and it was sport. So I took the plunge and then started doing Ipswich Town commentaries in February of 2003. So this is the start of my 24th full season following the Tractor Boys. Some people have suggested maybe I did something terrible in a previous life, but obviously we've had happy times in recent years after 1 or 2 seasons in the doldrums.
Yeah. Well, I did mention to you the other day that my one and only experience of going up to Berwick was when I played Sunday League, and we had to go up and play Berwick Rangers. Well, I say one experience. We had to do it every year. But once we had to play them in the middle of winter, and it was 2 foot of snow we had to try and clear from the pitch before the game, and we had to chase the sheep off as well, which was secondary to
I can well imagine that. I was back in Berwick this summer. You talk about what I've been up to this summer, Chris, and I was there for the first time in probably a dozen years, because most of my family now are based down in Suffolk, in this part of the world. But I did get back up to Berwick this summer. I had a lovely few days and still really enjoy that part of the world when I get up there. But yes, I can picture the scene clearing the sheep off a field.
Yeah, I'm surprised you weren't able to do a few snowball fights in the last couple of months, to be quite honest, from going back from that. But I mean, going back to when you got going at Ipswich Town, and again, I was kind of looking at how the numbers worked out and when you started, but it seemed to have tied in when Ipswich had finished 5th in the Premier League immediately after getting promoted. I think it was from memory, and then they went down the season after, when everyone blamed it on qualifying for the UEFA Cup, and I think they might have overstretched themselves. I think Panini George might have been one of the big signings from memory, but it's interesting because you started then, and actually a lot of people are saying there's a lot of similarities with what Sunderland have just done.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Yeah, that's it. I did get there just off the back of that wonderful first Premier League season. It was a year before I moved down here. They got promoted. They beat Barnsley at Wembley, a lovely occasion. And then they went up and took the Premier League by storm. Marcus Stewart, who of course is loved by both Sunderland and Ipswich Town, had that wonderful season. And I think they headed into the final game, still in with a chance of Champions League under George Burley. So it was remarkable. So I arrived in that summer. The next thing you know, Inter Milan were losing at Portman Road. Fans were off to Spartak Moscow. They had a trip to Helsingborg as well. So European football was here, and it was kind of the heady days. That was before I was doing commentary. I wasn't involved in any of that up until a couple of years ago. I'd never done a Premier League commentary, and I've still to do Europe. But yeah, it was great days, and really enjoyed that time, and kind of landed on my feet. But off the back of that, as you say, 2002, they got relegated. And then things bit really hard. It coincided with the collapse of ITV Digital. So the broadcasting landscape changed, had all the financial ramifications of that. Transfer windows were altered as well. So Ipswich Town were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. And then off the back of that, we were 17 seasons in the championship. So the club completely flatlined for a long time. But through a lack of investment, possibly a lack of interest from the owner at the time, eventually Town slipped into the third tier like Sunderland. And like you say, we had 4 seasons there before they've bounced back in recent times. But yeah, they did go crazy. It was kind of kid in a sweet shop. When you mentioned Finidi George, that summer of 25 years ago, we were down at Portman Road every 10 minutes to welcome in a new signing. I think they obviously thought they had to bring in extra bodies, understandably, for European competition. But sadly, it just didn't work out for them. They toiled, but no, out of the Premier League. And little did we know at that stage that they'd be out of it so long and go through a fair few managers to get themselves back up.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning of that Marcus Stewart, and I'm sure both sets of fans will wish Marcus Stewart all the best and hope he's doing well. But in terms of links on the pitch, going back to that time, I remember being a bit gutted actually when Chris Macon went to Ipswich Town, and then you've got the likes of the bigger names of Darren Bent, and then later on Jonathan Stead, Michael Chopra, Carlos Edwards, of course, during the Roy Keane era. Daryl Murphy, I think, was top scorer for a year or two. But of course, I want to focus on those huge characters who are still popular on Wearside when they were managers, and they were managers at Portman Road as well, Mick McCarthy and Roy Keane. Obviously, there's no love lost between the two of them, but from your point of view, because we've had some feisty characters in charge of Sunderland, including these two. But as a journalist, as someone who's got to ask them the questions, do you get more is it more nerve-wracking when you've got people like them and you know you've got to word things right, and if you ask the wrong question, you know they're gonna point it out and things like that?
To an extent, yeah, and it can be a challenge. And some managers you get on better with others. It's how you word things, and you just hope that they understand that you're doing your job, and you hope to build some sort of relationship whereby they realize you're not trying to catch them out, you're not trying to be clever. Sometimes you will get things wrong, and then try to build up a good working relationship. And with those two in particular, I'd like to think that didn't really get to know them on a personal level, but they would both. Mick certainly would address me as Brenner. Roy didn't use my name an awful lot. That's just the way he was. But I found him captivating. I had he had an aura about him. I loved listening to him. He could be very dry, very self-deprecating. I saw a couple of people get on the wrong end of him at one stage. He went ballistic post-match at Oakwell. He went absolutely nuts. And I'm convinced to this day he rounded on a local journalist who hadn't really said boo to a goose. I can't remember what the question was. Or I think it was more the fact that somebody hadn't asked a question about some penalty shout in the 18th minute or whatever. It was inconsequential. But he just rounded on the first bloke you could see, some little chap sat in the front row. And goodness me, I have said to this day, if somebody had gone up to Roy with a baseball bat rather than me and banged him over, he wouldn't have blinked. He was in the zone. He'd completely gone. And he also tore a strip off a national journalist that day for asking a daft question. And gave him the steely gaze. But in general, he was good with me a couple of times. I think he went as far as disappointed by that question, which I thought in the grand scheme of things, I'll take. You normally ask better questions than that, something like that. But he was great. He would come up, give me his 3 or 4 minutes, and off he would go. Mick McCarthy, similar in some senses. As I said, I didn't really get to know Mick, but really enjoyed working with him. He could be really straight, really honest. Again, you could get a laugh, that dry sense of humor. And as everybody would say that deals with Mick, what you see is what you get with him. There were no real surprises. I had an idea in my head what he would be like, and he did a terrific job. I mean, Roy tried his best, of course he did, but it was never going to work with him. He had players who did respond well to him, who wouldn't say a bad word about him on the record, off the record. People like Carlos Edwards, you mentioned. Grant Ledbetter joined him from the northeast down in Suffolk. Daryl Murphy really liked him, whereas others were just crushed. Just their confidence was flawed. They just couldn't match up to his very high standards. He had a game at Watford one night, finished at 20-10. The players didn't come out of the changing rooms till midnight. They'd had the rollicking of all rollickins. Somebody next to me said, "Look, they looked like they got back from the trenches. They were grey. He tore a strip off them. He had that in him." Mick didn't really. The players loved Mick. All of them seemed to. I mean, if you're not on the team, you're not going to be best pleased with the manager. But the team spirit that he kind of engendered at the club was terrific. He brought in really good characters, and he did a very good job. Eventually, fans had enough of his style of hoofball, as they called it, and he didn't do himself any favours PR-wise, and I'd imagine he was very difficult to kind of pull into line in terms of the media department and what they wanted from him. And it got to a situation where he was really kind of belligerent, and whether it was true or not, he would say things to us as press. Look, the more they ask for player X, the less likely he is to play. And he had a moment at Norwich when he reacted in a sarcastic way with a gesture towards the away fans. when Ipswich Town scored a goal through a player they liked that hadn't had many minutes, he didn't do himself any favours. Then it just got to breaking point. The relationship wasn't good enough. But overall, having had next to no money to spend, the job that he did to get them within a whisker of the Premier League was terrific. And it showed you what happened when he left. Within 18 months, they were back in the third tier. So sensible Ipswich Town fans, and the most of them are, now look back and think, actually, Mick McCarthy did a really good job. And I completely echo those sentiments.
Yeah. A lot of Sunderland fans look back now at the job he did here and realise he did it on a shoestring, and it's impressive looking back at it. But just coming on to the modern day a little bit, looking at the last decade or so, very similar paths really with the two clubs, because Ipswich, of course, were relegated to League One and spent 4 years there like Sunderland did. We had new owners who came in and got us up. Ipswich seemed to have Kieran McKenna, who worked miracles because he not only got them straight out of League One, but then straight into the Premier League on successive seasons. But looking at that rapid progression, and I always remember when I was young, Dennis Smith did that at Sunderland, and the club struggled to almost keep up with the progression he was making on the pitch. Was it similar in that respect, that Ipswich would maybe always struggle in that they bounced up twice? Or was there an element of frustration in the fan base to think, we had an opportunity, we should have went for it?
A little bit of both, but largely what you said first of all, Chris. I think it is right that the club went too far too soon, and the infrastructure really wasn't there. And in terms of their recruitment, where they're able to get players from, a couple of summers ago, the training ground, I think they spent a reported 30 million on that. That really is state of the art. There's nothing else like it in this part of the world, which is now literally in the last few days fully operational. And they just weren't ready for Premier League football 2 summers ago. It's something that's been talked about a lot by the former manager, Kieran McKenna, but even more by Mark Ashton, the chairman and CEO. And you just have to absolutely agree with them. And they just floundered. They weren't battered too often in the Premier League. And actually, the first half of the season, they picked up a couple of wins, a few draws. They were in games. But not long after Christmas, it became obvious that they were struggling, that the gulf was too great, and the momentum which had taken them from League One to the Championship, and those were wonderful days after so many miserable ones that preceded them, just ran out of steam, and they were just fish out of water. So they've tried something different this time around, and let's just hope that it pays dividends. But the club has come a long way in such a short space of time. I mean, Kieran McKenna's moved on now, but was it 4 promotions in 5 seasons, something along those lines. He did a wonderful job.
Yeah. Well, especially last season, because, looking at the Championship last year, Coventry ran away with it a little bit, certainly towards the end. But it was tight with Ipswich, finishing second, but only 4 points separated them down to Middlesbrough in 5th. But then he did another fantastic job to get them up. And I have to admit, it was a surprise to me. But having spoken to a couple of friends who I've got who are big Ipswich season ticket holders for kind of over 30 years at Portman Road, Ian Silverton and Adam Cheng, I just thought I'd give them a shout out because I'm sure they might listen into this one. They're the only one they listen to this season. But they said, actually, it was interesting because they said it might have been the best time for McKenna to move on because they actually felt it needed freshening up a little bit, because I was a little bit shocked to hear them say that. But do you think that actually when he did leave in the summer, it was as much of a shock to the club as it was to the fans?
I think it probably was. And it was a huge shock when I got the call on the Wednesday night from the club to say that 6 o'clock we're making a big announcement. And I obviously said, what is it? And they said, keep it under wraps, but Kieran's gone. And it was a real surprise, albeit towards the end of last season when we travelled to and from games as a press pack, we were having discussions about Kieran not being himself, and he hadn't been himself for a little while. He looked worn down. He looked physically, mentally exhausted. And I think he had been. I just think under that microscope, that pressure, and we must remember it was his first full-time job as a manager, and every single full season, either promotion or relegation, had been on the cards. And with all due respect to certain clubs, and I'm not undermining certain clubs and what have you, or talking that there's no pressure at certain clubs, but he hadn't had, for argument's sake, a Bristol City season, a Swansea season, a Fulham season, where you're kind of mid-table. And of course, there is pressure on those managers, don't get me wrong. But at all times, it was all about getting up, trying to stay up, getting up. And he took everything on board. I think he was the kind of cliched first person at the training ground, last person there. He did every single media request going for the last 2 or 3 seasons. And I just ultimately, because I've kind of got to know him pretty well the last few years, whilst devastated that he was no longer going to be Ipswich Town manager because I couldn't speak highly enough of him, I was also, on the other hand, really pleased on a human, personal level that he'd had the courage, the bravery to think about himself, to think about his family, and to move away from being the manager of Ipswich Town. I'd love to think that he'll come back somewhere in the future and be as successful as he was at Portman Road. But it was a real surprise, and the job that he did was miraculous. It was 3 promotions in 5 seasons, to slightly correct getting carried away with myself a few minutes ago. But he came in and inherited a squad which Paul Cook put together dramatically in the summer of 2001, the previous manager, and did a wonderful job when he brought in the likes of Sam Morsey and Wes Burns and Christian Walton, players who were real solid. Connor Chaplin came in that summer, players who played a massive part in those back-to-back promotions. It was Paul Cook that assembled them, but then to give Kieran his credit, he came and inherited those players, happily did so, and took them all individually, collectively, to levels that they could have only dreamt of. And I'm going to be interested to see where Kieran pitches up next. But he was a dream for Ipswich Town. And credit has to go to Ipswich Town for going out there and plucking this unknown coach from Manchester United to Mark Ashton and co, which was a potentially troublesome. It was a bit of a gamble, that decision they made in December 2001, but boy, it paid off.
Yeah. And just to confirm, Brenner, actually, my friends Ian and Adam both said you're respected by the fans and always insightful. So I thought
that's very kind of them.
Before we move on. But just quickly, just out of interest with Kieran McKenna, because he was linked to some big jobs, and his name seemed to come at the top of the list for quite some time. If it wasn't the top 6, then his name seemed to be on the list. Would you expect to see him maybe in a Premier League job? Would do you think a club like that would go in for him if they're maybe at the wrong end?
It's going to be fascinating to see where he turns up. I wonder. I don't know. He was strongly linked. People tell me that he was very, very close to going to Crystal Palace at one stage. I think it was before Oliver Glasner got the job. He was linked with Chelsea at one stage. There's the obvious connection to Manchester United and Tottenham, 2 clubs that he's worked at as a coach in the past. And then Celtic, which was one in the summer, and Fulham, actually, were 2 clubs that he was strongly linked with before he left Ipswich Town. At the moment, there is some kind of clause in place. If he were to take a job in the near future, Ipswich Town would be well looked after financially. I don't know where I see him pitching up. I can't help but look, if Derek McInnes has many more problems at Rangers, would he go there? I don't know whether his allegiance is more to the green and white in that part of the world, so that might rule him out. But he'll be a very good manager for someone, and he'll have learnt from what didn't go so well at Portman Road. And he'll obviously carry on doing what did go very well. And he was, when I hear tales from the training ground, it's all about attention to detail and repetition. And he does have a steely side to him, which you need as a manager. And when he comes back refreshed, and when the time is right for him, he will get a decent job at a good level. But you won't want to be out for too long. And there are other managers out there, whether it's a Thomas Frank or a Sean Dyche or people like that the clubs of a similar standard that might look at Kieran, might consider. He has to kind of balance that correctly in terms of when is the time to jump back in.
Yeah, well, dare I say it, but Norwich City didn't get off to the best of starts this season.
No, they didn't. That's been enjoyed in this part of the world.
But just before we get on to the current season, I think that's a good time for us to take a quick break. So we'll be back very soon.
Before the season even kicks off, soccer fans are already making predictions. Who wins the league? Who qualifies for Europe? And who's lifting the trophy at season's end? On Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code CUP26 to get $10 when you trade 10. KALSHI, Kalshi. Trade the beautiful game. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory.
Late night bites with friends? Already hard to beat. That first too hot bite of fries you couldn't wait for, followed by ice cold Pepsi. Now that hits different. Suddenly, the energy kicks back in, the night goes longer, and the laughs don't stop. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
And welcome back to How We're the Podcast. And we've got up to the current season, just about to talk about the new manager in place, Brenner, because Gary O'Neill was the man they decided to replace McKenna with in the hot seat. He had a little bit of a mini rehabilitation at Strasbourg, which seems to be the fashionable thing now, as he followed Liam Rosenior in doing that. But what was the general reaction to the appointment? Were the fans on board, or did they have someone in mind who they wanted to take charge?
It was mixed. Possibly more negativity than positivity, if I'm completely honest. In saying that, I don't think the field was particularly strong. When Thomas Frank said that he wanted a longer break from management, I think he'd have been a very popular choice. And then it got down to a lot of people maybe fancying Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. So there weren't too many names thrown forward. Then you had like John Eustace, Stephen Gerrard, a few people like that. We talked about one or two candidates from abroad. But Gary O'Neill, I don't think it was anything to do with his Norwich City allegiance. He was there for such a short space of time. I just don't think he was maybe the sexy appointment perhaps that town fans were hoping for. But then when they looked at his CV and delved into it a little bit more and thought, well, he did do a good job at Bournemouth. And at the time, I remember thinking he'd been treated really harshly when he got the heave-ho there. Wolves, in his first season, did a good job, kept them up. So he's got history at the highest level, which, of course, Kieran, through no fault of his own 2 years ago, didn't have, not least as a frontline manager anyway. So he's got that on his CV. And I think he's conducted himself really well when he's been in the media, come across well. I think they've liked the vast majority of the signings that he's made. He was known to Mark Ashton, the chair and CEO, from his time when Mark was management or hierarchy, should I say, at Bristol City. He was there as a player, so he kind of knows what he's getting. And Mark has had a history of employing younger managers. So no, I think he's made a good start, albeit obviously none of his games have been competitive so far. But people are starting to like what they're seeing from his team, and players are, as you'd expect, perhaps saying the right thing about him. So no, there's a bit of a feel good factor around him now.
Yeah, it's interesting. You did mention the link with Norwich, and of course, I'm sure if results go right, then it won't matter. But if results don't go the way he wants, do you think that means they've got slightly less patience? They might have a little bit less goodwill just based on that, or do you not think that's going to be a factor?
I don't think so. I don't think that's going to be a factor. We've had Joe Royle in the past. Of course, we've had Paul Lambert in the past. There have been players that have moved from north to south in terms of Norfolk to Suffolk. No, I don't think so. And I think in general, he will be given time, albeit they've spent all this money. I think the fans will be fairly patient. And as I say, there was no real standout candidate on the list that all of a sudden, a couple of months down the line, Ipswich Town should have gone for. So I don't think that will be thrown at him. I'd like to think they're going to be fairly patient because it's new manager, new division, and pretty much a new squad that he's dealing with.
Yeah, well, let's get on to that, because we've said a few times on our podcast, over the course of last season, that we wondered if clubs might look at what Sunderland were doing and look at that as a potential blueprint on how to stay in this Premier League. I'm counting at the moment 12 new signings at a cost of around, I'm looking at 180 million in some sources, but of course the record seems to be 160, so you never know what to trust. But let's just say it's a lot of money. The other thing was, the interesting thing, the average age is around 25. It isn't far off what Sunderland did last season in terms of numbers and that average age as well. And on paper, again, compared to Sunderland, we did the same, where it looks like there's only 2 or 3 players actually who might make the starting 11 who were there last season. But are you liking what you're seeing in terms of the recruitment policy compared to the last time they prepared for the Premier League?
Yeah, I think there could be as many as 7 debuts for Ipswich Town on Saturday. Maybe O'Shea, Greaves, Davis, and possibly Eggerley might start that were there last season. Eggerley might drop out if they throw Ciso in. So it could be as many as 8 debutants. And in terms of the money spent, I think at the moment it's currently something like 150 million. But from speaking to the CEO and chairman this morning, Mark Ashton, they're after more signings. So I'm 99% certain your record spend of last summer is going to be topped. And in terms of the players they've gone for, the profile is very different to 2 years ago when, as I said earlier on, they didn't have the recruitment structure in place and Kieran cherry-picked the best players from the Championship when he went for Jacob Greaves, Sam Smodix, Jack Clark came in, Jaden Philogene later on, Liam Delap, Amari Hutchinson, players like that who'd all done it the previous season in the second tier with one eye on, yes, they might keep us up, but if they don't, there's a really good chance we can bounce back at the first time of asking, which is indeed what they did back in the spring to get promoted back to the Premier League. Whereas this time, a bit like yourselves last summer, they've gone abroad. The other things that I've noticed about the recruitment, they've added a lot more physicality to their squad, which they lacked a couple of years ago, and that was obvious. There were times it was the cliched men against boys when they come up against certain sides. I don't think they'll be as bullied this time around. They look as if they're players who've got a bit more about them. And the number of top-flight experience, or the number of top-flight appearances, should I say, is vastly different. I looked back yesterday at the team that started against Liverpool 2 seasons ago. It looked a good team. In this part of the world, on social media, a few people have been knocking that team, but I'm not really having any of that because Kieran had a mixture of exciting young talent in Hutchinson and Delap in that side, and also players who'd done the business for him over the previous 2 years. I've got no qualms about that team that he fielded on that day. I like the look of it, still like the look of it now. But what I would say, when I looked at that 11, they had 16 top-flight starts in their entire history in that side, and all of them were Axel Tuanzebe at right back. 16 top-flight starts from him. I think Delap had 2 Premier League starts for Man City, Hutchinson 1 for Chelsea, so no top-flight experience. And probably the 11 that starts on Saturday will be into the hundreds in terms of appearances. And the vast majority of players they brought in this summer, and I'm not just talking about Lukic and Diop from the Premier League, but Maeda, top-flight experience in Scotland. A lot of players that played at the highest level in France and Holland last season. So there's a vast difference in terms of top-flight experience that's in this current Ipswich Town squad. It's light years away from 2 seasons ago.
Yeah. You might be in the same position we were when we signed all these players last season, that we didn't have a clue who they were or how they played or anything like this. But is there anybody in that list who really excites you in terms of the new recruits?
The 2 that I keep talking about, not necessarily on an excitement level, but the 2 signs that have really grabbed me, the 2 lads from Fulham, Diop and Lukic, just battled hard and 6 foot plus, bags of Premier League experience, know the division inside out, and they look like the sort of players that I'm delighted that Ipswich Town have added to the spine of the side. And they're sort of on an unknown quantity scale. They're nearer the known end of that. The unknown quantities are people like Emerson, a Brazilian striker, club record, potentially has been usurped in the last few days by Enciso. But anyway, we've been describing as a club record signing over the summer, but he's only a 22-year-old Brazilian brought in from French football, who at the moment is likely to lead the line on Saturday. They badly need to invest to still bring in striker, or even 2 of them in the remainder of the window. That's an area where they are light. But he's impressed with some of his hold-up play, the way he can ping a ball in from even a goalkeeper. He takes it on his chest well, brought others into play, and he scored a couple of goals recently. Who else? Fatawu, that you might have seen play for Leicester in recent seasons, scored against Ipswich Town from the halfway line with the King Power last season. He's a talented footballer. And Maeda could be somebody that his first experience of English football has done well in Scotland. He'll work his socks off for the full 90 minutes to press and harry and close people down. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how soon he can kind of gel them into a cohesive unit. We've seen them in fits and starts in recent times, albeit pre-season friendlies against sides from abroad. We've seen some good promising stuff from them, but they've now got to do it when it really matters against Sunderland and Man United, Liverpool. They've got a tricky old start to the season.
Yeah, we were heavily linked with Fatawu last summer, and we thought we were going to go for him in the end, but it didn't happen last year. But just in terms of that new squad as well, I mean, because when you read it out on paper now, the job that O'Neill's got on is a hell of a job, not only to take a side that has just got promoted, because that very rarely happens. You very rarely take a club over when they've been successful, but almost that they're building a new squad. And he's got, because we were worried at the start of last season that Register Briss had to manage the players who were nailed on starting 11, then weren't getting a game. And Gary Neal's got to do that, but as a new manager, he doesn't know those former players.
It's really tricky, isn't it? It's really difficult. And when I was speaking to Mark Ashton this morning, I kind of put it to him, with this investment, to me, it doesn't look like you're just targeting 17th place. And he came back immediately on the front foot. No, we've got to look higher than that. And I was going to bring up the follow-up question, was obviously, well, that puts a lot of pressure on your manager. But he did immediately. He said, pressure is a privilege. I don't mind saying this publicly. We are looking higher than that. In saying that, 90% of fans, if not more, would snap your hand off at 17th place now, one step at a time. And obviously we were all there 2 years ago when Ipswich Town were completely out of their depth. But it's fighting talk, it's positivity, it's just kind of the way that he is. And that is something, like you say, Chris, Gary has to deal with. He's got such a big in-train, so many things to consider. At a new football club from him, he's been thrown straight in at the deep end with so much work going on at Portman Road. I mentioned the training ground earlier, not least of all, finalising his plans for pre-season, sorting out what's going to happen when the serious stuff starts, but also this massive recruitment overhaul, and that's going to continue right till pretty much the 11th hour when the window closes. So it's a massive challenge for him. I think there's more new managers than ever before in the Premier League this season, which is going to be interesting to see how the likes of Fulham and Palace and Newcastle and Chelsea and Bournemouth, Liverpool all get on with those new men in charge. But O'Neill with a new division to contend with as well, which of course isn't the case at both Coventry and Hull. They've both got settled management. It's good luck, Gary.
Yeah, well, you say that, and I've been talking a lot in the last week. You did mention that the number of managers or new managers in the Premier League. But I have been saying in this last week that I don't think there's ever been a Premier League like this, where I just think everything's been thrown up in the air. You look at the top six, there's a lot of those clubs who, you struggle now to say, are they still the top six? Because they're all starting from scratch. But there are opportunities there, and it does seem like clubs like Sunderland and Ipswich are identifying that it's not the same Premier League as it was a decade ago, and it's less of a closed shop.
It is.
Because they seem to have gotten so comfortable, they've let it slip a little bit, and there's definitely an opportunity there.
Yeah, I think there is. And you're seeing clubs qualify for Europe like Bournemouth and Brighton, of course, Sunderland as well. Brentford gave it a real good go last season. A lot of people at this stage last year were writing off Brentford under Keith Andrews and never in any real trouble whatsoever. So there are so many unknown quantities. And I think we've just got to focus on finishing above the two that came up with us. So finish top of that mini league, and then just hoping that as well as Coventry and Hull, somebody does have a really, really difficult season. And what we also have to do, and again, Mark this morning made this really clear to me, and this has been his mantra all week, wherever I've seen a clip of Mark or read quotes, he's talking about making Portman Road that fortress, that cliche. It has to be about winning games at Portman Road. And they didn't do that the last time until December. They beat Chelsea on the 28th of December, and that was their one and only home win. I mean, away from home, they picked up 3 victories. And ordinarily, if somebody said to me at the start of that season, you'll win 3 away games, I went, it's probably all right, because that must mean we're going to win 4 or 5 away, and 8 or 9 might keep our heads above water. But that wasn't the case. They had their wins at Tottenham, Wolves and Bournemouth, but that Chelsea win, so they've got to do an awful lot better. And again, I kind of said to him, that does not put pressure on Saturday then. So if you get off to a losing start against Sunderland, things could be. And again, no, pressure is a privilege. That's fine. We're up for it. We're ready to go. But that's just another factor which is going to come into this season. And let's just see how we crack on. Sunderland and Leeds have certainly given Ipswich Town hope and inspiration for what you did last season. Maybe 1 or 2 Ipswich Town fans, because of Sunderland's success, are looking at Europe. But I'm like, no, keep your powder dry. Let's just see if we can. Let's just get 17th place sorted out.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, because looking at what we did and what Leeds did and the amount of money they spent, where do you think the expectation levels are? Because especially if the CEO was coming out with statements like that saying we don't expect to be 17th, or that's not the ambition, then that's going to surely move on to the fans, and they're going to expect more this year.
Yeah, they're bound to. I mean, as we speak, that interview's kind of not gone public yet, but that will make 1 or 2 think, yeah, why not? It's interesting. I had a fans forum. I do a show on a Monday night on BBC Radio Suffolk, and I had a fans forum the other day with 3 fans in, and asked them, right, nail your colours to the mast. Where are Town going to finish? 2 of them said 17th, and 1 of them went 15th. So on average, we're around about that area. What I must say is one of them actually tipped Sunderland to be bottom 3. So yeah, just as well you're not speaking to him today, which I don't quite see. But yeah, that was the general feeling amongst fans, But like you say, whether when they see Mark's quotes and hear what he has to say on the radio, you might start thinking, why can't we do a Sunderland as they're going to be talking and do an Ipswich from 25 years ago? But no, I just think we've had one Premier League season in the last 25 or so, little small steps. Let's keep our heads above water this year. And with better recruitment, with a bit of tinkering in January, bit of tinkering next summer, once the training ground's fully up and flourishing, maybe next season we can talk about top 10, top 12, something like that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But just quickly before we move on to the game, just a quick word on Jack Clark, because still popular on Wayside for the part he played in getting us out of League One. But how's he done since he made his move there? And do you actually see him playing much of a part in the Ipswich side this season?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. He kind of shared the role a bit with Jayden Philogene last season, pre-season, funnily enough, 12 months ago under Kieran McKenna. Jack was on the right-hand side and Philogene was on the left. But when the season came, it was mix and match on the left-hand side. I can't remember if Kieran actually started a league game with both of them in the side. So one of them would start, and as is the way now with the 5 subs after an hour, the other one would come on. And Jack had a good season. I don't need to tell you how good a player Jack is on his day. 16 goals, got a few penalties in there as well, but some really important ones. They tended to be either to get a late win or a late draw. And he's played a little bit in the number 10 in the summer, so I'd like to think that he still has a part to play. And like a lot of Town players, will be out to prove they are capable of playing at that standard. There's a lot of them with a bee in their bonnet, the way the season went a couple of years ago. Leif Davis, another one from your part of the world, just up the road, that say they're Premier League ready, they know where it went wrong, they want to prove a point, and they're kind of hungry. And that's the thing. I've said this to a couple of people recently. Understandably, fans are excited about the 12 new signings, £150 million, the potential of Mbolo or Palacios to come in the next couple of weeks or so. But those lads that were there last year that got them up, that had Premier League experience of a couple of years ago, and those that have been added to the group, like Azor Matusiwa, who won't play at the weekend, but was Town's best player last year, they've still got a big part to play this season as well. They're more than capable, hopefully, of holding their own and kicking on.
Yeah. Well, actually, looking at the game on Saturday, I mean, again, I'm going back to us last season because we didn't have a clue. But has pre-season given you enough clues on how O'Neill might line up in terms of starting 11 and shape, or is everyone just guessing who he might throw in for the opening game?
I think we've got a fair idea based on the side that played against Union Berlin a week ago. A couple of players were injured in that match that didn't feature, but I think they're going to be okay for the weekend. And interesting, you talk about shape, Chris. Kieran was a dyed-in-the-wool 4-2-3-1 man, come hell or high water. He would always switch like for like. And it could get quite frustrating at times. There's my one slight criticism of Kieran. I think Gary's going to be a bit more flexible, and I think the team that he's likely to go with at the weekend will probably start with a back 4. But I would imagine it'll be Dara O'Shea at right back, which he's played a little bit in the past, I think, for Burnley. Certainly has the Republic of Ireland, but he's a centre half with probably Diop and Greaves in the middle, and Leif Davis at left back. I think that's got the flexibility to easily turn into a 3 of O'Shea, Diop and Greaves. Davis will get further down the left-hand side, probably Fatawu down the right. Lukic will start in the middle with, I'd imagine, Florentino Luis that he brought in from Burnley, because there's no Matusiwa at the moment, no Taylor. And then the I mentioned Fatawu on the right-hand side, possibly Eggly in the 10, with Maeda to the left and Emerson up top. It's not going to be a million miles from that. Like I said earlier on, I guess one decision he's got to make is whether Eggly starts in the 10 or whether he throws Enciso straight in, who's been training with the club since he signed on Monday. That is a possibility. So I think that's a fair old idea. Certainly the idea of the team that I've given to Nick Barnes anyway. So if I get it completely wrong, he's not going to be best pleased with me come 2:00 on Saturday when the sheets come out.
Yeah, you've thrown in a couple of mistakes there just to keep him on his toes.
Just to catch him out.
Well, just on that system, because again, my 2 friends, big Ipswich fans, they always talked about this system that Kieran McKenna will play. Has that helped O'Neill in coming in where he's not taken over a squad who have been playing this formation and are locked into these positions and how to play? Because he's squad building, he can almost set it out as he wants from day one.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'd imagine that's a really fair point. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, what he played at Strasbourg, but I just think in general it helps to have that flexibility. And I think it made a big difference for Leeds I believe, last season in the Premier League when they went to 3 at the back. It's a system that I really like, and I just like managers to be able to tinker and alter and just change things up at times during matches, which we haven't really seen in recent seasons. But I think that Gary kind of has that about him, and it's just finding the right blend of players that can, on the fly, change within matches. So I would expect it to look like a 4 on Saturday when it starts, but it probably will be fluid within the game, depending on what Sunderland go with, how different that is to what he expects to see. And personnel as the season progresses, if he wants to play 3 at the back, he might need to bring in another centre half. They could be a little bit light in that area. So whilst all Town fans are understandably screaming from the rooftops demanding another striker, I'd be amazed if they don't bring one in, incidentally, before the window closes. Maybe another centre half, possibly even another midfielder, depending on who goes out. Could be areas that they look to strengthen even further.
Yeah, I'm sure Nick Barnes has told you about Regis Labrisby, and I think they dub him the professor or the scientist or something
Yes,
like
I've
that
heard.
in the press room. But again, just going on with Saturday, because it's still fresh in the mind for Sunderland fans, what we did to West Ham on the opening day of last season as a newly promoted side at home on the opening day of the season. So for that reason, I'm not sure we would have picked Ipswich away for the first game of the season if we'd had a choice. But are you expecting Portman Road to have that newly promoted kind of party feel to it on Saturday?
Yeah, there'll be an amazing atmosphere. Yeah, as I said earlier, Mark Ashton's been making a lot of making Portman Road a fortress. They'll be really up for it, like they were against Liverpool a couple of years ago, but possibly even more so because they won't quite be, with all due respect to Sunderland, maybe the trepidation. And they're probably headed to that game thinking, oh, imagine if this is 6 or 7-0. Imagine if Liverpool run riot. So I don't think there'll be fear and a thumping. The vast majority, I'd like to think, have got their heads screwed on correctly and look at last year's league table and see that this is an almighty challenge against clearly a very, very good Sunderland side. But no, they'll be right up for it. They'll be believing that Ipswich Town, because they've been cock-a-hoop about the signings, and they also realise that with Manchester United and Liverpool, their next 2 games, plus then a couple on the road, they realise the enormity of this game. There will be something, and goodness me, we've got to get something from Sunderland, because otherwise we could be heading into that international break in a really, really tricky position. And it was obvious looking on from afar last season what an impact your positive start made to Sunderland the rest of the season to kind of give them that belief. And when Ipswich Town were promoted 3 years ago now, coincidentally, you'll remember, I'm sure, it was a Sunderland versus Ipswich on the opening weekend of the season, and Ipswich Town came up to the stadium and won that game. And not that long ago, when Kieran left the club this summer, people were asking me I had to do like a top 5 of Kieran's biggest wins or best wins, whatever it was. And in that list, I put firmly the win at the Stadium of Light, because they went to Sunderland that weekend. I think you'd finished 6th the season before, and they just ticked off so many things in one weekend. They ticked off, we can win at this level. We can win away at this level. We can win away at a good team at this level. And that was just a big boost, and they kind of carried on that momentum. So whenever that first win comes, hopefully they don't have to wait as long as they did 2 years ago. It will be big, and if it can come on the opening day for Gary O'Neill, that doesn't do his aura any harm either.
You say that, you only put it in there to wind Nick up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll be reminding of that this Friday night.
Well, after you've said all that, look, just to improve the optimism for Sunderland fans even more, Sunderland have only won once in 10 attempts at Portman Road in league games this century. That win came back in January 2021, which was behind closed doors during COVID. Charlie Wyke scored the winner for Sunderland, but we were helped by Caden Jackson being sent off after just 10 minutes. And I make a point, certainly, Brenner, on this, that not to ask for score predictions, because, look, anything can happen, like I've just said, with that sending off of Caden Jackson way back when. But how do you see it playing out? I mean, do you think, being the start of the season, first game, do you think the two sides might be a bit cagey, not wanting to lose the first game? Or do you think O'Neill's just going to want to get off to a flyer and Ipswich is just going to come out the blocks quickly?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more the latter. Yeah, I think Town are going to get at them, go right for it, and really try to stamp their authority on the game and on the season. And all this talk in the build-up about winning at Portman Road and being successful, I'd be very, very surprised if Ipswich Town are cagey and kind of sit back and show you too much respect. There'll be a balance to it, of course. There has to be, because if all of a sudden Sunderland pick them off and Robbie's looking for his hat-trick after 25 minutes, things haven't started particularly well. But I just think they will start on the front foot, try to get it Sunderland, try and use that energy from the crowd, because from probably I was going to say from probably midday onwards around Portman Road will be electric with a fan zone. There's a lot of redevelopment at the ground. Fans are so up for this, but come 2:00, 20 past, 2:30, it will be absolutely crazy inside the ground. And the players have got to thrive on that, not be bowed by it, not be intimidated. And as I say, I go back to that point that a lot of these players have played at World Cups, played in big games in England, France, Holland, wherever. And they've got to make the most of that opportunity, have a good go at Sunderland and hope that they catch Sunderland a little bit off guard, a little bit rusty, a little bit thinking that it's only Ipswich, which I'm sure the Sunderland players and manager are way too professional to do. But they've just got to try to use everything available to them to get an opening day win.
Yeah, I'm glad you said redevelopment at Portman Road, because the last time I was there a few years back, I was on the back row, and in between me and my mate who were on the back row, there was a big metal post going right between the two of us. And we kept having to, depending on which way the ball, what side of it the ball was on, we kept having to lean over this metal post that went.
Oh, goodness me, they've done so much work. They did it a couple of years ago with the undersoil heating and the surrounds of the ground. There's a new PA system. So much has changed. And Nick's not going to recognise the media area either. That's completely switched to a different part of the ground from the last time that Sunderland were there. And interestingly, just as a little aside, they've done a lot of work on the West Stand this season, which is opposite. Sunderland fans are effectively in the East Stand. Behind the West Stand, they've done a lot of digging down, and the chairman was telling me this morning that when they broke ground, unbelievably, went down a few metres to do whatever in terms of foundations for new buildings and extensions, they actually discovered the roof of one of the stands from the 1950s. So when the ground had been redeveloped, 70-odd years ago now, knocking on for 80 years, they hadn't taken the roof off site. They'd just put it in a huge hole, covered over it. So that's just added to some of the problems this summer. So yeah, it's the funny old little tales that you hear.
Yeah. Well, look, you've commentated on Ipswich Town for around 25 years, like was said, but do you still get that Christmas Day feeling on the opening day of the season?
Definitely. Yeah, very much so, Chris. I looked forward to it when they were playing Morecambe and Forest Green and whoever not that long ago. So I do really look forward to the opening day of a season. Usually lovely weather and just that excitement and what lies ahead and just the hope that you've got, whether Ipswich Town can get promoted as they have done in recent seasons or this time around, have a real good go. And also looking forward to getting back to, with all due respect, I mean, some great grounds in the Championship, but some of the best grounds in the world to go to places and to watch some of the best footballers in the world. So particularly when it's the Premier League and particularly this time around. And also to just see what we get from a new manager with new players in a new division. It might work spectacularly well. It might go pear-shaped. We're just really unsure of what lies ahead. But yeah, even heading into my 24th season of doing it, I still do genuinely get as excited as ever.
Yeah, and this time, not just a Christmas Day, you've got a Christmas Eve going for a curry with Nick Barnes.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, there'll be a table of 4 or 5 of us booked into the Dakar in Ipswich. So I'll try and keep him on the straight and narrow, but looking forward to catching up to him with him for the first time since, as I say, we had a little jaunt right at the start of the summer that was this year.
Yeah, well, say hello to him from us, and I'm sure if his voice is croaky on the Saturday afternoon, we'll know why. But it just leaves you to say it's been an absolute privilege to catch up with you, Brenner, because I know you don't agree to do many of these, so we really do.
No, it's a real rarity.
Appreciate
a real rarity.
But so we really do appreciate your time, and we hope you enjoy the season, and hopefully we can maybe catch up for the reverse fixture. Who knows?
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me on. Really nice to chat, Chris.
Good stuff. Brilliant. Thanks again, Brenner. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. If that's not enough, and we know it never is, we'll have all of the build-up tomorrow morning with every angle covered on the Rugger Report website with a preview, a stab at the starting 11 and predictions. So we've got it all on there. But we've also got our preview podcast in the morning on How We're the Podcast. Don't forget, every match day, our daily podcast becomes a twice daily podcast, as we'll have the immediate reaction after the final whistle with Gav and the rest of the lads. And then we'll have a more measured, maybe a Sunday supplement the day after, depending on what the score is. So look out for all of that. But from us, it's bye for now.